Alright, welcome back to another build video. I have a new kit I'm putting on my store, so I figured I'd go through and do a build on it. Today we're going to go and do the DNA 200, which is a new board I'm carrying. And through the powers of movie magic, I actually have it here. So I'm recording this bit last because I didn't exactly know what I was going to include in the kit yet, but now I do. I will say right off the bat, the battery is not included in the kit. Everything else is, though, that you'll see in this video, and one other extra part. But other than that, this is the new biohazard splatter box that I just put on the store. So if you're interested in that, you can find that there as well at nonameboxmods.com. Other than that, I put a lot of work into researching the parts needed for this kit, so I'll go through them real quick here. That is the actual DNA board, and we'll come back to that in a second. So if you're not familiar, this is Evolv's response to temp control and high wattage boxes and all that stuff. So what do we have here? Standard low profile 510 connector from Fat Daddy Vapes. Always love those. For this one, I'm going to give the choice of either using a shelf pin or a regular button for the firing button. So for those not familiar, a shelf pin is actually one of those pins that go on a shelf. And that is exactly what I used to create the raised buttons on this box. It turned out pretty well, if you ask me. So 3 of those will be included by default, or you can choose to upgrade to a standard push button. And I will also be offering as another option these tactile buttons in addition to the shelf pins for the adjustment buttons. So those are all extra options. What else do we have here? We have 3 6mm brass standoffs. This is what holds the board away from the box and allows it to be mounted. And then on the inside of the box, to secure those, there will be 3 of these machine screws, which screw into the board and then into those brass standoffs. So that's that. And then on the outside of the box, there are 3 flathead screws, and you can see those kind of hidden in the camouflage of the box here, but there's 3 of them. And that is how we mount everything. And then, as with all my kits, have these 4 grub screws that go in the screw posts, and that is what the 4 neodymium magnets connect to. So we got that. To connect your battery, I am offering this XT60 connector, and that pulls apart relatively easily. That will be included in the kit. We also have some double stick tape to attach the screen, and some pretty industrial strength Velcro. You can just cut up bits of it to hold your battery in. There will be some heat shrink tubing and some thick gauge wire. I don't have that cut right at the moment, so I can't show it to you, but it's good wire, I assure you. There is also an acrylic, it's not acrylic, it's Lexane, screen window. This has the coating on it right now, so it does not look very shiny, but I assure you it's very clear when you take that off. And then the last and most exciting bits, inside these anti-static bags. I'm not going to take the screen out because these are actually a pain to open. But this is the screen that comes with a DNA board from Evolv. And this is the DNA board itself. You can see here with a USB connector. And then the last piece is this, what do they call them? XST battery connector. This is for doing the balance charging with the LiPo battery. And just to get that out of the way, you're going to need a 3 series LiPo battery. I'll put some suggestions on the page, but you're going to have to order that yourself. I just don't want to deal with shipping batteries, honestly. But otherwise, this is a pretty nice little board, and it turns out to be a pretty good kit. For boxes, I'll be offering this in 1590G, the small box. And I really should have thought of it. But this is the 1590B. So there'll be two sizes that you can choose from. This is a different box, but you get the idea for the size difference. And with the bigger one, you'll be able to fit a bigger LiPo. Right now, I have to say I'm not very happy with the battery life that I get from this. I might be able to get 3 hours from this 900 milliamp hour battery. That's not very good in my opinion, and I think honestly 3 hours is pushing it, but that's about it. And the last thing that I forgot to show, you'll have your choice of a color for a lid sticker, and that goes in here to insulate and kind of pretty up the inside of the lid. It's just mostly a concern of any of these parts contacting anything that they shouldn't. So since the G box is pretty tight, I'm including that as well as with the 1590B size. So that is the kit, and we'll get started building it. Alright, so let's talk about tools before we get started drilling everything out. This is the majority of what I use to drill out boxes. Most important one probably being the hand drill here. I do have a drill press that I use for making the holes for the magnets, but for the most part I use the hand drill with this vise that you can barely see in camera here. Other than that, a stepped drill bit is great for doing like the 510 connector holes, the larger button holes if you end up using those, that kind of thing. For this one, we're going to need 3 different size drill bits, and we'll go over those on the drilling diagram here. One is the 5/64, and that's for the tiny screws used to mount the board. So that's 5/64. And then 13/64, which is about 5 millimeters for the shelf pins that will be used for the adjustment and fire button. And a 1/4 inch for the magnets that go on the lid. If you're deciding to use the 1590B kit, the larger one, there'll also be the option to have an external button on that one because it'll actually fit. And you would just use this step drill bit here. Other than that, we do need to cut out the screen and a little bit of a slot for the USB connector. For that, use a combination of the Dremel here with a cutoff disc and probably some very small keyhole files like these. Other than that, safety glasses, always need those. And I'll just show you this vise here. This is just, I think it's actually meant to go on a drill press, but it's low profile, and it was really easy to mount it to this piece of MDF. And I just swapped these boards out depending on what work I'm doing. So that was pretty much the other handy thing to have. So let's get on to drilling it out. Okay, before we actually start drilling out this box here, and this is the one I'm going to use for this build. This is the Biohazard on the website. So I make these drilling diagrams for pretty much all the kits, and they are meant to essentially be pasted onto the side of the box. I use a glue stick, which I should have mentioned in the tools, but just Elmer's all-purpose glue stick, washes right off, so there's no problem with that. But basically what you do is you cut these out and you paste them directly onto the side of the box. Now there's some things you got to be careful of with that. When you print this out, don't print it out in your browser. It will skew and change the margins and stuff. So open it up in a PDF viewer like Adobe Acrobat or Preview if you're on a Mac. And then after you print it out, take a ruler and check this scale box here. That should be 1 inch by 1 inch. So after you double check that, should be good. The only other thing to note is you want to cut outside of these solid black lines. And that's just because the entire box is like the dimension of, you know, the way my diagram making program works. So just cut them out on the outside of the box and it should be good. For this one, we have all the markings here for the different holes. These small ones are for these screws that mount the board to the side of the box. The solid line here, this box in the middle, is for the screen. We'll cut out that solid line. The dashed lines are just for reference. And these larger circles with crosses through them are for the adjustment buttons and the fire button. You can use an alternative fire button if you think you can get it to fit in there. Just for simplicity, I'm going to go with the shelf pins. That should fit in there. Other than that, there's just the little USB port, and that's what we'll drill out and use some files on. For this one, I think, so I have 3 different positions for the 510 connector here. On the far side, away from the screen, so that would be on the far side. On the near side, and then centered. Just looking at the battery I have and the space the board takes up, I think I'm going to do near side on this one, so there's that. So let's get these cut out, and we'll paste them onto the box. Go. Okay, I'm going to use this one. So one thing to note about these cutouts is they have these perpendicular dashed lines on them. And I'll show you what those do in just a second, but basically they are used to line up where these are going to go on the box. And get that cut off. Okay. So what they actually line up with are the posts on the inside of the box. So holding this up here, you can see those dashed lines are right about like that. And the reason I did that is because it's hard to line it up with these curved corners. So when you do get it right, it should be flush with the top there and about lined up with those posts. So I'll just apply some glue to this. And I just kind of slap it on there. Like I said, this stuff washes off real easy, so you don't have to worry about it too much. And then we'll get this. Now, apparently I did a rather poor job of cutting that out, so I'm just going to kind of adjust that a little bit of an overhang. And that was actually not the side I want to put that on. So with these splattered boxes, the bottom is usually pretty blank, so it'll sit up nicely. And that is why I'm going to redo this. There we go. Okay, now for the top, instead of trying to glue this on and do all that at the same time, I'm just going to use a hammer and a punch to mark that. You can glue it on if you want, but since it's only one little mark, I just do it this way. And I think I can see that. Okay. Now the next trick is, let me get that on there right. We want to put some tape over this. And I just use packing tape. And what this does is it just kind of strengthens the paper for when you're doing like the screen cutout and everything. So I want to make sure to cover that. And I'll get some over that USB port too. The other holes I'm not so worried about because we don't actually have to file those out. Alright. So that looks pretty good. For this vise, I always use some cardboard shims here to keep from marking up the box. Alternatively, you can use painter's tape. Doesn't provide entire protection, but it's still pretty good. And the first one I'm going to do is this 510 connector at the top. So this is going to be a 7/16 hole on the stepped drill bit here. I'll adjust this a little. So that did over drill a little bit, and that's okay. The 510 connector will actually cover that up, so it's nothing to worry about. And then between every drilling, I just like to clean this out, make sure there's no metal shavings in there. Now next up we can do the individual holes. And just to make these easier to hit with a drill, since they need to be pretty precise, I'm going to punch them. Should be good for the moment. I'm going to do these very smallest ones first, and that'll be the, what is this going to be? The 5/64 drill bit. And this will be what the mounting screw is attached to. Try to get the camera to cooperate here. Okay, that's those. I'm going to switch to the 13/64, which I believe is this one. Hopefully those are in the right spot. And last up, actually going to use an 1/8 inch bit. You could really use anything that's just small. So I'm going to mark some holes in the corners here. And this is just so we can use the cutting wheel to get to these. Hopefully that works. Fortunately, these don't have to be too precise, but we do want it to look good after we're done. Okay, so that is very rough about. I'm going to use the Dremel to cut a couple slices along these sides here. Hopefully I didn't go over too far there. Now what we can do is just take this punch and near one of the ends, just knock that out. That should be good. So now we use a file on this, start cleaning up a little. Now what's cool about the file is it'll start to cut back the paper here if you're doing this right. And for this part of it, I mean, you could do rounded corners if you wanted to, or really whatever. There's just the gap so you can see the screen. That's pretty close. Okay, I'm just going to clean up these sides, make sure they're pretty smooth. I'm relatively sure when I was drilling I kind of went over, so I'm going to try to file this back just a little bit more than it needs to be. Alright, that was the easy part. And the most troublesome I have is with this this little thing here. The USB port, I should say. I think the main issue... Alright, let me do this. So I'm basically just filing sideways right now from one of those pilot holes I drilled. And hopefully that will, in short enough time, connect these two holes together. I think I got them. Yep, they're connected. So let's clean this up a little bit. So again, with these dimensions on here, the outside line is the extent of how big it needs to be. So you basically have to wipe out everything, including the line. And I'm trying to get all of that right now, as much as I can. Because when I want to start test fitting the board, I'm going to have to take the tape and everything off. Alright. So what I'm going to do now is go off camera and wash the glue off after I peel this all off. So yeah, that doesn't look very good, but we'll clean it up and I'll be right back. Alright, so here we are. Let me see if I can find a piece of paper. So that looks actually pretty good in my opinion. I'll grab the board here. Let me zoom this out a little. So really the only trick we got to worry about here is getting that USB port to fit. And it looks like I got it on the first try. My holes weren't exactly drilled the best, but I think we can fix that. But there we go. Just a few more steps and I'll have a working mod. Alright, so one last thing for drilling we have to do here is do the magnet holes in the lid. And for that I'm going to use a drill press just because it does the straight up and down a lot better. And this is the 1/4 inch bit in here, which should perfectly fit the magnets when we're done. So I'll do one and then kind of zoom through the rest. Alright, so the trick is to not go all the way through. You want a little bit of a lip left, and that will help retain the magnet when you glue it in place. But otherwise it should fit in there perfectly flush. So that's it. Now if I did all that right, which looks like I did, the magnets should fit flush all the way around. And that is the end of the drilling. Okay, next up for a little bit more metalworking here, we have these shelf pins. Now this is one of the options that is the default for the kit, and I'm also going to offer these small round tactile buttons. You want to use these instead. What's really nice about the DNA 200 board is it has, you can grab it here, it does have wire connection points for the up, down, and fire buttons on the side here. So you can actually connect wires to those, and you don't have to cut off any of these switches or anything like that. So that is one benefit of this board, I would say, over the SX 350 boards and stuff like that. So, but for mine, I'm going to use these shelf pins. I kind of like them. The idea here is they go inside, and what I'll end up doing is cutting these down. And since it has this I don't know, the separator or whatever on it, it prevents it from going all the way through. And we'll just file down this side to get it to about the height that we want, and maybe round it off a little. And then we'll cut this down so it fits perfectly in between the board and that tactile switch on the board. This is a bit of work. I do think they look pretty nice though, after you get them polished up. This is what I did on this SX 350 box that I have. So same little kind of idea here. Due to the size of the 1590G box, and I've already put the posts on the board here, basically the board and everything in here would be a pretty tight fit with adding on a regular button. Let me grab one. So trying to fit this button in here, I guess it could have been done, and maybe I'll still offer that, the button, but otherwise I'm going to use the shelf pin for this one. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, so what I just did is I took my hand drill out to my belt sander, and this is probably the overkill way to do it, but I'm okay with that. There we go. So mounted the shelf pin in the drill chuck, just like that, and then did the initial grind down to get it to roughly the size. In between the box and the button should be about 2.5 millimeters. If you have digital calipers, that would be ideal. So I just ground it down to fit, and then reversed it and just kind of held it at an angle and made a dome out of it. Imagine you could do the same thing with a block of sandpaper in your drill if you wanted to do it that way. Otherwise, just a vise and a draw file like this. You can cut off a bit of the shelf pin with a hacksaw to give you, kind of a head start on it. Or the cutoff wheel from your Dremel would work too. I just used the belt sander because it was faster. So now, what these look like, I kind of made two different sizes here. I got one for the fire button, and I can clean these up with sandpaper and drop them. So that'll sit right in that hole. Should be perfectly sized for that. And then these two will be down here. I made them a little bit shorter and a little bit more recessed because they're just the adjustment buttons. But that should sit right about there. And then the board will go in and screw down right on top of that. So something like about like this. And I think, in fact, I'm pretty positive I'll have to do some more filing down on these because they weren't quite perfect. Right now, if I screwed that down, I'm pretty sure it'd be pressing all the buttons. So there's that to keep in mind. Other than that, that is the fire buttons and the adjustment buttons. So next up, we'll start wiring everything up, get some things soldered on, and I'll be pretty close to the end of the box actually. Just wanted to take a second here and go over tools for soldering. And all the electronic stuff that we'll be doing in this one. Some of the obvious ones, wire stripper, wire cutter. Additionally, if you have some nippers, that's also helpful. Totally not necessary though. I like to have just pliers around to move stuff and help lock down the buttons and stuff. Forceps for jiggling around wires and getting stuff where it needs to be. This is flux paste. Helps you get better solder connections. Some people say it's not required if you use rosin core solder. I like to be safe and use it. For a soldering iron, you're probably going to want at least a 30-watt iron just to be able to heat up the solder enough. There isn't a lot of soldering to do with the DNA 200 board. There's like 4 connections minimum that you got to make, and well, a little bit more than that. Call it 6 with a 510 connector. For wire, I'll be including wire in the kit. If you want to use other wire, it's totally okay. Be including some 16 gauge wire for the heavy stuff, and if you order the alternate buttons, I'll include some 24 gauge wire to be able to do that. Let's see, what else? In the video, you'll probably see me use these automatic wire strippers. I have these because I strip a lot of wire. They're not necessary though, they're just nice. And I use a different soldering iron than this one. I use my Hacko FX888D soldering iron. This is digital temp control. Flip it on here. This is a great soldering iron, but it is expensive. It's like 90 bucks. Although I've been told that occasionally Fry's has it for about 70 bucks. So if you ever see that, that is a hell of a deal. And you can grab that. And the other thing that I use a lot in these videos is this these tubes with gator clips in the end, affectionately referred to as El Squido. This is coolant hosing that you use for like CNC machine drilling, that kind of stuff. Blows air or liquid onto whatever you're cutting. I just drilled some 1/2 inch holes in a piece of MDF and epoxied these in. Works great. I think this is totally better than a third hand tool. But you know, it's big and bulky, and it's more of like if you're doing a lot of this stuff, but it is helpful. So those are the tools I'll use in the electronics portion of this. If you got any questions, just post comment. Alright, let's start getting this thing wired up. So I'm still finalizing everything that's going to come in the kit. I will include some wire, so you don't have to buy that, since there's really not going to be much required. Come in an anti-static bag here, and this is the board. Previously you saw I had the posts on it. I'm going to go over that in a second. The other thing that will come with is this JST XH connector, I think is what they're called. I don't know, some part number. But you're gonna have to solder that onto the board. And what is not included in the kit is a battery. I got this one straight from Evolv because they said it worked. So I figured I would trust them at their word on that. And this is the battery that I'll be using. And so what do you got here on the battery? This connector and these 4 wires are for doing balance charging. Since this battery has technically 3 batteries in it in series, it's a 3S battery. You have to provide the ground, of course, but then you have to provide individual positive connections for each of the 3 batteries in there. And that connects to the board, and the board handles balance charging the 3 separate batteries. If you try to charge 3 batteries in series without doing that, they'll gain an uneven charge, and that leads to them venting and all sorts of bad stuff. So there's that. These other 2 wires are obviously the power wires. If you get one of these batteries or whatever and it doesn't have a connector on it, do not take these insulation pieces off until you're ready to start working with it, and even then only take one off at a time. Because if you cross these wires, you're going to short out the battery, and that is bad. So let's look at the board here real quick. Other than this balance charging port, there's only 4 connections that we're going to use in this video, and that is the battery plus, the battery minus, ground for the 510 connector, and the positive out for the 510 connector. As I mentioned in the last clip, there are these holes along the side, and they're 2x2 here. They're fire, looks like down and up. So you can wire on your own tactile buttons if you want to. Other than that, I'm just going to attach some leads to the ground and out up here for the 510 and for the battery, and then I'll go over the correct placement for this connector, and I believe it's like this, hopefully. Yeah, and we'll solder that all on. So that's going to be the main gist of the soldering. So to begin with, I'm just going to clamp this up so I can stabilize it, being careful not to clamp down on anything too important. And I'm going to cut out some wire here. For this, I think I'm just going to use 18 gauge wire. I think it'll be plenty, honestly. This is way more wire than we need, but just to make it easy to do what we're doing. And clamp this in place. Now I did put a little bit of flux on this, and that's mostly just to make sure we get a good solder connection here. If I can get this to stay. see. No, of course not. So maybe it'll help if I tin this up first. There we go. Put just a little bit more flux on that. Some people say I put too much flux on all my soldering connections, and I have to honestly say I don't care. I know it doesn't hurt anything, and I know it helps, so it's just a little bit wasteful is all. Alright, so that's our battery positive connection. I'm just going to turn that a little. So I'm going to tin this up again since that seemed to help a little. There we go. Alright, that's just crap. So what I'm going to do is just hold it. There we go. Finally got a good reflow on that. Alright, so next up the 510, which is seriously not going to need to be this long. And somehow I managed to move that out of the camera. So since I don't know what the camera got there, I just soldered 2 wires onto B- and B+ over here. And now this is going to go on to the out contact up here at the top. And looks good. Some black wire. Tin that up. Now if you are looking to do the auxiliary buttons using these holes on the side, looks like I would suggest somewhere around 24 or 26 gauge wire for that, just so they're small enough. Just to be sure. That looks good. Now the only thing left to do is the balance charger. So looking at this, on the board they are labeled ground 1, 2, and 3. Ground's going to be black, and this connector goes in like that. And you got to remember we're doing this from the other side. So basically the slots are on the outside. So it has tabs, so you can only put it in one direction. So that is going to be down, and that's going to go right there. And then we'll solder from this side, which is the USB side. Okay, and for that we should just be able to do some easy touch soldering here. If that USB port wasn't in the way, it would be a lot easier. Okay, so what I just did there was bridge two of the pins together, which is not a very good thing to do. So one easy thing you can do is just take a strip of wire that you have bare, and you can get it to soak up that extra solder pretty easy. They do make a product called solder wick, which is pretty much the exact same thing, but just use it to absorb a little bit of that solder there. And there we go. That is the balance charging plug. And it's sitting up a little bit, but that's okay. Should have plenty of clearance in the box and not have to worry about that. I'm recording this part as kind of a cut-in. When I was doing the original build, I ended up soldering the battery pack directly to the board, and I didn't like that too much for a couple of reasons. Just because it's awkward, you can never take it out without tearing the whole thing apart and desoldering it and everything. So I decided to include this XT60 connector in the kit, and I thought I should go over how to solder that up since it might be a little confusing. I don't have another LiPo battery, so we're going to pretend these two leads here with heat shrink tubing on them is the battery pack, as it were, because it'll have two leads coming out of it. So this end is where the battery would be, so imagine a battery right here. And I'm going to go over how to solder these up. So in the kit you'll have some heat shrink tubing, and this big stuff is to go over these connections, because we do not want these exposed. So I'm going to go over this step by step, and I'm going to emphasize that when you get your LiPo pack, you might be like, well, why are these things on here? They're on there so your battery pack doesn't short, and if your battery pack shorts, you're going to have a bad day, mostly because you're going to have a bad battery pack now, and possibly because it might do something like explode. So we want to avoid that, and to do that we're going to do this in kind of a specific order. So some things to note: the outside portion of the connector with these posts in it, this gets connected to the board, and the part that inserts into it is what's going to be connected to the battery pack. More so, the ground is going to go on this angled side, So we got this peak here, and then we got a square side. So the square side is going to be round, or the square side is going to be red, I'm sorry, and the peaked kind of rounded corner is going to be the ground, the black wire. It's important to keep that the same across everything, otherwise you're going to fry things. So I'm going to do the one for the battery pack, and I'll go over the specific order of what we're going to do this in. So I'm going to clamp this up here, and we'll get started. I'm going to use flux for this, just to make sure we get some good solder. And let me grab that here. There we go. So first thing I'm going to do is dab just a little bit of solder into the connector here, and I'm going to tin it up, so flux base and solder, and this will just give the wire something to stick to, which will help because these are actually made for some pretty heavy gauge wire, which I don't think we're going to have the need of. And I'm just going to flip this over and do it again on the other side, just so we have that ready. And I'm going to rotate it back, so this is the square side up, and we'll pretend our battery pack's over here. So square side is going to be red. What we want to do is take this heat shrink tubing off the end here. Might have some sort of other isolator. Things you want to avoid. Don't be tempted to take your wire cutters and cut across both of them at the same time. That will short it because your wire cutters are metal and conductive. So we're going to get this off of here. Man, I really got that stuck on there. Now you may need to trim down these wires, especially if you're building in the G-box. Just something to keep in mind. There we go. Okay, so we still left the insulator on the black one. We're not touching that yet. And we will strip off probably about 1 centimeter, maybe 1/4 of an inch, depending on your preference for measurement units, and twist it up a little, and I'm going to put a little flux on it. Goop that on there, and then I'm going to tin up the wire. To again make it easier to insert into this. So now we need to take a little bit of this heat shrink tubing. I'd say, I don't know, I'm going to go with like 1/2 inch or so, and we're going to thread that onto the wire and place the wire into the connector pocket. So red, square, it even has a positive mark on it. And I'm going to fill that in now with some solder. If I can get it to melt here. Alright, looks like I got that filled in pretty well. Now, before we do anything else, we want to cover up this connection, and it is still a little warm, but really try to fit the heat shrink tubing. Man, how did that get so warm? Try to fit it down into this groove here. Just to make sure we get as much covered as possible, and then hit it with a heat gun. Now the reason we shrink it up before we go on is because if you slip and you got your bare negative wire and it touches that, it's going to short. So I'm doing this in a pretty specific order for a reason. Just keep that in mind. And now we'll flip it over and bare this other side. If I can get it to cooperate here. You know, people tell me they love to see the struggle in my videos. And to that, I say, I love all you sadists. You know, I'm glad you can appreciate my suffering. Alright, almost there. Honestly, if I had a battery attached to this, I'd probably be being a little bit more careful right now. Alright, that is probably close enough to strip. That looks about perfect. And we're going to repeat the same process here of tinning up the wire. And throw just a little bit more flux on this. I think I forgot that on the last wire, which is probably why it gave me some trouble. And then we're going to do about a 1/2 inch again of the heat shrink tubing. And clamp this all in place. There we go. And pile on the solder. If I can get it to cooperate here. And keeping in mind that that is very hot right now. Okay. And that'll be the battery side. So then we'll just get the heat shrink tubing here in place again. Try not to hit the battery with a heat gun while you're doing this. That's a little tip. And that is the battery connector. And then of course that plugs into the other one. And you can just repeat the same thing. Leads coming off of this going to the board. It'll probably be easier if you connect the wires to the connector and then connect it to the board. And you'll also be able to see, you know, how much room you got inside the box to get all these wires to wrap around into each other. So there you go. And now on to your regularly scheduled build video. Next up, we need to get the 510 connector on. And before I do that, I'm going to put these posts on. Let's see here. So in the kit, there will be 3 of these brass standoff posts and 3 machine screws, and then there's 3 other little black ones that go on the front face. But these ones, these little metal ones, go on the inside. And the thing that I found is they are a little bit big for the holes in the board, but fortunately that's only because the holes are filled with solder. Now what you want to do is just be careful when you first screw these in. You will have to use a little bit of force, but make sure they go in straight, and it will basically thread itself, and you can just screw it in. So this is going in from the back of the board. And there is only 3 of these, so keep that in mind. Looks like they didn't have room for a 4th one on the board, so that's understandable. Now, since you're basically tapping these when you screw them in, like I said, it's important to make sure they go in straight. It's not a huge deal if they don't, but you will have a harder time getting these brass standoffs to line up with the holes that you drilled in the box, and that could be a little frustrating, I assume. Alright, and then these little brass posts just screw right on. Twist them on. There we go. Now the reason I wanted to get those on is because I want to test fit this in the box with these wire, which is, like I said, way too long. But I just wanted to get an idea of how that should be cut for the 510 connector. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is probably putting a little Q in this for the 510 connector and letting it wrap around, something about like that. So if I grab one of those. So keep in mind, this is, I think, the shortest 510 connector that Fat Daddy Vapes makes. So yeah, it's going to be about like that. I can get my wire cutters, wherever they disappeared to, and we'll trim off a little bit of this. So about like there, and just to give that enough room to kind of flex around, do that about that. So that is what we got to work with for the 510 connector. Shouldn't be an issue here. Strip off some of this. Now there's only a few tricks to getting this to get connected and really do a good job as a 510 connector. Zoom out a little here. So this is the positive pin for the 510 connector, and it is spring loaded so that center pin moves. One thing you want to be careful of when you're soldering these is you don't slop the solder over from that center pin onto what's basically the brass nut here. If you do that, it's not going to be spring loaded anymore, and I don't think there's any way to get that solder out of there, so just be careful when you do that. I like to clamp it up like this, and then I take some flux, and I think this is a really good use of the flux. I just kind of wipe it around in the hole for the positive wire. Just make sure there's a good bit in there. And do usually, alright. So first you want to tin up the wire to give it some bulk and make this whole soldering thing a little bit easier. Now keep in mind, I kind of intentionally stripped off quite a bit of that, and that's part of the trick on how I do this. So I'll clamp this up here. Now when I put this in, the way I do it is I want a little bit of this stripped wire sticking out, and that's pretty close. And what I like to do is kind of keep this as level as I can so the solder doesn't kind of flow out, but just start warming this up and feed in solder. And what this will do is it'll melt out all that flux in there. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but it's bubbling right now. And that'll actually pull the solder back into that pin. So we should have a pretty good connection right now. Now the negative ring is also pretty easy to do. First I'm going to tin up the wire, and I actually kind of stripped too much off this one, but that's okay. And I'm going to trim that off. So you don't want this so long that it reaches this inner circle. Let me get that in the camera. You don't want it to reach all the way into this circle, because that's also where the nut screws down for the 510 connector. But right about there should be perfectly long enough. And then just spread a little bit of flux. I like to get it in that hole there on the tab. And then I just kind of pile on some solder with the iron. And that is the 510 connector connections. Next up is figuring out how long these wires should be for the battery. I think I got that about in place. Let's see here. What was my plan for this? Just kind of thinking I might bend this back like that. So the connector will go in, and then we can just kind of patch these wires together somewhere in the middle. I should have plenty of room up here with a 510 connector. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Alright, so trimming these down, probably want these to end, I would say, about here. Oh yeah, serious waste of wire. I'll have to try to use that for something productive. And I'm going to splice these in. I may end up deciding to provide a battery connector plug, but for the purposes of my own build, I don't plan on taking this battery out, so this should work fine. Alright, now for the tricky part. So like I said, only cut off the insulation on one of these at a time. And the other thing we're going to want to have ready is a little bit more insulation of our own. So just enough to cover the splice. And hopefully that works. Alright, so really be careful with these because it's really easy to screw them up. Don't take your wire cutters and cut across both of them at the same time. That will short it. Don't take these insulation tips off at the same time. You have a pretty good chance of shorting it. It's mostly just be careful. So strip off a little bit there. Give some flux. Now it'd be wise to immediately cover that up. And I'll grab the heat gun, being careful not to hit the battery pack with it because those things don't like temperature. Alright, so that went relatively well. Make sure to pull this off. There we go. Again, strip a little bit off. And solder it up. Ah, you know what I forgot? I forgot to put the heat shrink tubing back on there. That's just dandy. Hey. I gotta say, this is probably the most nerve-wracking part of the build. So I'll let that cool off, otherwise the heat shrink will instantly shrink around it. Alright, here we go again. I was reading a thread on Reddit and someone compared hooking up the LiPo to diffusing a bomb. I don't know if I'm just feeling the pressure here or what, but almost tend to agree with them. Alright, get that covered up. Ta-da! Now of course those wires are very long, but I'm okay with that for the moment. Get that turned around. and plugged in. Actually, I did want that to go this way. Okay. Now, just so we can check everything is working, I'll just kind of sit this here, and I'll grab the screen, which will be in this anti-static bag inside another anti-static bag. And I would just like everyone to know that it was ridiculously hard to open these things to get them in. So if you order this and are having trouble getting it out, please know that I sympathize with you. Alright, so here is the screen. This is the front, and this is the ribbon. Now, let me put that to the side for the moment. If you look right here, find a tiny screwdriver. There is this little clamp that you can lift up, and then, so this is screen face down because we're going to fold it over. Then you feed the ribbon, and I'm sorry if you can't see this, but I can't do that holding it up in the air. So feed this little tab into the slot on the other side of that clamp. Like so. Now you gotta be really careful with this. And then you just fold that clamp back down. And you can fold the screen over. And there we go. Looks like we have a working DNA 200. Battery is about half full. So right now I am going to stop here, and we'll continue on shortly. Alright, so off camera I took the screen off again because I want to put the double stick tape that'll come in the kit onto the screen before I start assembling it. So I'm going to get that on there and just gently press it down. I want to make sure that it sticks. Now the way this should be relatively thick enough. Still trying to decide if I'm going to put plexiglass in this kit or not. So I'm going to get that on there again. And hopefully it'll be a little easier this time. So I just flipped up that little tab and just using these forceps to guide it in. There we go. And just kind of draw it in. Now you got to be careful with this screen ribbon. They are pretty fragile, and you don't want to crease it, so keep that in mind. I think I'm going to have to trim off just a little bit of this tape to get it to land about where I want it. So I don't trust myself. So what I'm trying to do is get this to line up with, there's this little black box here that's kind of getting in the way. And I believe I positioned the screen hole correctly. Alright, so that should work fine. Do this yet again. Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty well positioned. And just kind of take a look here. Yeah, miraculously, I think that's about right. Alright, so it could go that way just a little bit more. Which means I'm going to need to cut a little bit more of that tape off. I have to say, given how much of a pain this battery is being, definitely going to look into the battery connectors so it can be installed last. Alright, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and peel off that sticky backing. And press that down. Right about yay. see if I can fold these wires up like how they're going to end up. Alright, so that's pretty much where it's going to end up at. And that looks like it framed it pretty well. I don't know how well it shows up in the camera. Before we screw all that in, I think it's going to be easier to do the 510 connector first. So I will do that. And if you got one of these low profile 510 connectors, previously I've had some problems getting this on with the Delrin in, and I don't know if I noted before, but don't solder the positive pin, this one, with the Delrin on it. There's a good chance you'll melt it, and you don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do here is get this negative on. I'm going to start the nut to threading, and then you can just switch over to quarter. And twist it up. Now before you get all the way to the end, you're probably going to want to kind of tuck the negative wire down in there. And we'll do that. Then we will screw this Delrin onto the positive pin and fold that back in here a little bit. Seems like that negative wire might get in the way a little bit. That's okay. Actually, I'm going to try to go under this. Alright, so take your forceps, and you gotta be careful lining this up. The Delrin is pretty soft stuff, and you don't want to strip it out, so make sure you got it properly threaded in there before you really start cranking on it. And you finger tighten that down. And just to finish it off. Alright, so that's our 510 connector. Next up, we'll get our shelf pin button extenders, or whatever you want to call them, and these 3 little black screws, and that'll be the ones that hold it from the outside. I did have some trouble finding some good screws, so unfortunately these are actually a hex head, and you're going to need something pretty small to get them in. I think this is a T5 Torx is what I ended up using. It's not a perfect fit, but you know, you work with what you can. So now we gotta kind of wrap this all up in here. I think I'm going to end up rebuilding this. Jeez. Yeah, that was like just terrible accounting for space on my part. Alright, so that's kind of fitting in there. Alright. So one of these is taller than the others. And that is going to be the fire button. I will somehow manage to get that into its correct hole. And I'll do the adjustment buttons. Sorry about that, had a customer call. So let's get these buttons in. We got that one. Probably just put that one in there. Alright, so one thing I didn't do yet is I didn't chamfer these holes for these flathead screws. They're beveled, so that could be an option, but I kind of just want to get this put together. Alright, hey, look at that. All the buttons work. Doesn't look like any of them's jamming down and causing a problem. So, just carefully pack this in here. I guess I did not anticipate that battery connector sticking out so far. But I think that should all fit. There's going to be one other thing in this kit, which is going to be a patch of Velcro, but right now I'm waiting for it to come in the mail, so it's not here yet. And I really want to try this out, so. Alright, so my memory card ran out before I could continue saying what I was saying. It does work, and it works pretty well. That's at 90 watts right now. I'm not sure I want to turn it up too much further with this build, but definitely works. We're just going to finish up the last couple of things. I think I mentioned in the last clip, I don't know if it got cut off or not, but I was waiting for some Velcro to come in the mail, and as it was, while I was cleaning up my SIM card, or not SIM card, memory card, the Velcro did come. So I'm going to cut off a few little pieces of this. This stuff's pretty thick, so I don't think I'm going to use too much of it. Probably not much more than the depth of the box here. So maybe trim that up. Get a nice straight edge on it. Probably about that much. So this is supposed to be like some super industrial Velcro. Maybe I should have ordered something a little less extreme, but I wanted to make sure it would stick permanently. So I'm going to peel off this backing here and get it stuck in there. So I'm just going to put this bit up here at the top. And hopefully between everything it will retain the battery well enough. Alright, so one last thing we got to take care of is the lid, and this was part of what got cut off. So these brass standoffs are pretty close to the edge here, and they'll probably end up running into this slip that runs around the lid that keeps it from sliding off. So we're just going to notch that a little bit with the Dremel tool, and up here at the top where the 510 connector is. I'll do that off camera real quick, but you could use a file or a piece of sandpaper wrapped around a marker or something. You're just getting rid of this lip. Just be careful, the powder coat comes right up to the edge, so if you start cutting down into that, you're going to have a gap around the edge. Much other than that, it's not too much of an issue. Yeah, I would blow a cloud here, but I have it disconnected. Alright, so I ground down the lip just in those places that I marked with a Sharpie. And I'm not going to put it on just yet, so I'd warn you against that if you're building one of these. The other thing that's included in the kit is this, it's basically a vinyl insulator. It's textured like carbon fiber, so it looks pretty cool and everything. But this will just isolate the lid from anything that might come into contact with. So I use a cutter plotter device to cut these out myself, actually. And generally I charge $1 for them, but they'll be included in this kit. And just try to get that all sized up. And something is jiving here. I think it's actually the battery, which isn't a good thing. I think maybe it's just a wire sitting under there. Yeah, there we go. Alright, one more thing to do here, and that is put the magnets in. And that'll just go on the lid here. So I use epoxy for that. Generally I recommend DevCon for epoxy. Personally I use this Bob Smith Industries 5-minute quick cure, mostly because it comes in big bottles. So I'll just get a little bit of that mixed up, and I'll grab the magnets here. For this box I'm going to be using these black ones. They do not come standard in the kit, but I figure since got this nice orange box with black splatter on it. It would be fitting. So what I'm going to do here is spread these magnets out before I get started, and that will make picking them up easier. And just grab some wood sticks. I always see people in YouTube videos, they use like odds and ends to mix up their epoxy, and I gotta say I really appreciate having a stack of these little paper plates and a quantity of these wood craft picks or whatever they are. If you do a lot of this, it's just it's nice to have the right tools. So I'm going to use probably about, I don't know, I'd say a nickel's worth of each epoxy, or each component, or whatever it is. Don't need terribly much. And as we get into the colder months, might be a good idea to start keeping your epoxy in a warm place, otherwise it really takes forever to run. There we go. Mix this up well. Now I do probably have too much here, but that's okay. Stuff is actually pretty cheap. Now one thing I like to do is grab another plate and actually put the lid on it. This allows me to turn the plate as I do the magnets, and that's kind of important because you don't want to be slopping glue over all of the lid when you do this. So I just get a little bit of glue, about that much, and swirl it around in the hole. Rotate the lid. Now a lot of this glue is going to get pushed out the bottom, and I'll go over that when I come back to do the wrap up part of the video. But basically I just use like my pair of wire cutters to clip it off, and then X-Acto knife or something to basically trim off the rest of it. Want just a little bit more in that one. Alright, so the reason I laid out the magnets like that is now I can take a screwdriver and pick one up, and you want to take a non-metallic stick or whatever, so you push it down in and then you slide the screwdriver off, and then you just want to make sure that's flush, and you just rotate and do it again. And last one. And that is how you glue your magnets in. So we'll put that away for now and let it dry. And last thing we have to do is put the grub screws into the screw post. And these are the grub screws, little tiny ones. And I like to use, usually, I think I got a hex bit for this somewhere. I'm relatively certain one of these fit it. There we go. So one caveat with putting these grub screws in is sometimes the powder coat gets down into these screw posts and causes a little bit of a problem. If that happens, just turn the grub screw back and forth a couple of times until it cleans out the threads. If you'd like, you can also throw a little dab of Loctite on these and make sure they never come out. But I don't think I've ever had any problems with them. They stay out of the way for the most part, and they give your magnets something to hang on to. So there's that. And there we go. So when we come back, I will put the lid on and show it off, and it'll be done. Ta-da! I think this turned out pretty good. Big fan of the biohazard box myself, so there is that. I still got to learn more about the DNA board itself and all the functions and everything, but turned out to be a pretty clean box. And I gotta say, I really like the smaller size. It's hard to think that this DNA has more potential power than this gigantic SX350 box that I built. So I'm pretty happy. I'll be trying to figure out some other kits to put together for this, possibly a squonk. Gonna have to figure out if I can fit that in a bigger box or not. One thing to note, I did cut some Lexane actually and inserted it here behind the screen window and in between on top of the screen, so I'll be including that in the kit as well. I also used a chamfer bit to drill out a little bit of these holes to get these screws a little bit more flush. But those are pretty minor cosmetic details, and turned out pretty good. So if you'd like to buy this kit, you can find us at nonameboxmods.com, just like that. And you can look around on my YouTube channel here for bunches of other boxes that I built. So have a good one.